It started like any other Friday night. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. The rain had been falling for hours. Soft at first, tapping the roof like a quiet metronome. Then heavier, almost violent, like it wanted to keep us locked inside. The living room was dim, except for the soft amber glow of a single-floor lamp in the corner. It cast a golden circle of light across the carpet, making the rest of the room fade into shadows. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, a blanket draped over my shoulders, my knees pulled close to my chest. Across from me was Mason Blake, my stepbrother. I still remember the first time I saw him, a year ago, when our parents got married. He was standing in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with that easy grin, the kind that made you feel like he already knew all your secrets. Back then, I told myself I didn't notice, that I didn't care, that he was just another face in my life. But tonight, something felt different. We were alone. No parents, no friends, just the two of us and a stupid game. Truth or dare. It had started as a joke. We'd been bored. Netflix wasn't loading because of the storm. Our phones were barely getting any signal, and Mason, being Mason, decided to make things more interesting. He'd smirked at me, that spark of mischief in his eyes, and said, "Come on, Noah, let's play, unless you're scared." Scared? Of him? Of a game? I should have laughed it off. I should have said no. But instead, I gave him the small, defiant smile and said, "Fine, truth or dare." And just like that, we started. The early rounds were harmless. He dared me to drink straight from the milk carton. I dared him to text his best friend and say, "I miss your scent." We laughed, really laughed, and for a while it felt like we were just brothers. But Mason had this way of leaning forward when it was his turn, resting his forearms on his knees, his gaze never breaking from mine. And every time his eyes caught mine in that soft, golden light, it felt like the room got smaller, warmer. When I picked truth, he'd ask questions that dug just a little too deep. Have you ever thought about kissing someone you shouldn't? What's the most nervous you've ever been around a person? I'd roll my eyes, laugh it off, but inside, my heart was pounding. We were maybe an hour into the game when it happened. The moment that changed everything. It was my turn to choose. And for some reason, maybe stubbornness, maybe curiosity, I said dare. Mason's smile didn't change, but something in his eyes did. It was sharper, hungrier. He leaned back, as if considering his options, then leaned forward again, voice low, steady, like he was about to tell me a secret only I could hear. "I dare you to kiss me." For a second, the rain outside was the only sound in the world. The hum of the lamp, the quiet drip of water somewhere in the kitchen, and my own heartbeat hammering against my ribs. "What?" I asked, half laughing, half choking on my own breath. Mason didn't laugh. He just tilted his head slightly, like he was studying me, like he wanted to see what I would do next. "You heard me, Noah. Kiss me." The blanket around my shoulders suddenly felt too warm. The air between us, too thick. I could see the faint curve of his mouth, the way his lips parted slightly as he spoke. I told myself it was just a dare. It didn't mean anything. But the truth was, it meant everything. That's where I should have ended the night. I should have rolled my eyes, refused, laughed it off like every other dare before it. But I didn't. I don't know why my hands were shaking when I set the blanket aside. I don't know why I didn't look away from his eyes. And I definitely don't know why when I leaned forward just an inch, he didn't move. And in that moment, the line between stepbrother and something else blurred in a way I couldn't take back. The room felt impossibly small, like the walls had shrunk around us, closing in with every heartbeat. Mason's eyes held mine, steady and unblinking, like he was daring me to step closer or back away. His lips were just an inch from mine. The silence between us was loud, deafening. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry, my hands trembling so badly I had to grip the carpet beneath me to stop the shaking. For a heartbeat, I thought about running, standing up, grabbing the blanket, and pretending none of this had happened. But something rooted me to the spot. Maybe it was the warmth radiating from his body or the way his gaze softened, begging me not to retreat. Time slowed down. My breath caught as I leaned forward, just a little, not enough to kiss him, but enough to feel his breath mingle with mine. Enough to know that the line we'd danced around for months was about to disappear. "Are you serious?" I whispered, voice cracking under the weight of everything. He smiled then, a slow, knowing smile that wasn't a joke. "No one's ever dared me to do that," he said softly. "But I'm serious, Noah." I felt my heart hammering in my chest, because the truth was, I wanted to, more than I wanted anything else. But I was also terrified, because Mason wasn't just my stepbrother. He was the one person I was supposed to keep at arm's length, the one person who blurred every boundary I'd ever set for myself. We'd grown up separately, two lives colliding into one house a year ago. I was a quiet kid from the suburbs, always tucked away behind books and music. He was a wild card, charismatic, charming, and impossible to ignore. Yet here we were, on the floor, in the storm, about to cross a line that neither of us had dared to mention before. The first time I met Mason, I thought he was trouble. The kind of trouble that makes you forget how to breathe. He laughed too loudly, smiled too easily, and moved like he owned the world. My mom warned me to be careful, but I didn't listen. Because beneath that confident exterior, I sensed something fragile, something broken that he hid behind those easy grins. And in a way, I was broken too. We were two halves of a puzzle no one else understood. "Do it," he whispered. His voice was barely audible, but it struck a chord deep inside me. I closed my eyes, took a shaky breath, and pressed my lips to his. It was electric, a spark that jolted through every nerve in my body. His lips were soft and warm, like they belonged there, like they had always belonged there. For a second, the world faded away. The rain, the shadows, the uncertainty, they all vanished into nothing. Then he pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine. "Okay," he said, breathless. "Your turn." The game had changed. We had changed. We continued playing, but everything felt different now. The dares took on a new edge. The truths cut deeper. When he dared me to whisper a secret, I told him about the night I thought about him, not as a brother, but as something more. When I asked him if he ever felt the same, his answer was a slow, deliberate nod. We were unraveling, piece by piece. Later, after the game ended, we sat in silence, the storm outside quieting. He reached out, fingers brushing against mine. No words were needed. That night, I pretended to sleep, but I felt his hand move slowly along my side, a touch that promised more than words ever could. The next days were a blur of stolen glances and half-spoken confessions. We moved like shadows around each other, close, but never quite touching. Every conversation was charged with a tension neither of us dared to name. At school, I caught myself watching him, his laugh, the way he pushed his hair back, the curve of his smile. And when he caught me looking, his eyes held a secret I wanted to unravel. But fear was never far behind. What would happen if someone found out? What if this changed everything? The line between right and wrong blurred until it didn't exist. And all I wanted was to throw caution to the wind and dive headfirst into the unknown with him. That night, I lay awake, replaying the kiss over and over, wondering if he felt the same way, hoping he did. Because for the first time in a long time, I wanted something more than just safety. I wanted to take a chance. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting stripes of gold and shadow across the floor. But the light didn't reach inside me. It only served as a reminder that the night, and everything it had unleashed, was gone. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to untangle the mess in my head. The kiss with Mason replayed over and over like a broken record. His lips, soft, hesitant, electric. The way he had looked at me afterward, vulnerable, daring, and the quiet promise that lingered between us, unspoken but impossible to ignore. But with that promise came fear. Fear that something fragile had been broken. Fear that the boundary we'd silently agreed upon was now shattered, and that there was no going back. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and closed my eyes, trying to shut out the whirlwind. The truth was, I didn't know how to be normal around him anymore. Every glance felt charged. Every touch, accidental or not, sent sparks shooting through my skin. I was hyper-aware of him, always, even when I pretended not to be. Breakfast was quiet. Mom was busy in the kitchen, humming to herself, oblivious to the storm brewing under her roof. Mason sat across from me, eyes flicking to mine and quickly away. The tension was thick, like static, waiting to be released or to snap. When I left for school, Mason's words echoed in my mind. I'm serious, Noah. At school, I was distracted. Classes blurred together. I caught myself zoning out during lectures, replaying every second of the night before. The hallways were crowded, noisy, but none of it reached me, except when Mason appeared. His presence was magnetic. The way he moved, the effortless confidence, the slight mischievous smile he always wore. When our eyes met across the hall, my heart leapt and my stomach twisted. He didn't look away this time. Instead, he gave me a slow, knowing smile, the kind that said, I'm here. I'm waiting. After school, I found myself walking the same path he took home. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself I just wanted to get some fresh air, but really, I was hoping for a moment, a sign, anything. When he appeared ahead, leaning against the brick wall of a closed cafe, I stopped. He looked casual, hands in pockets, had pulled up, but his eyes were sharp and alert. Hey, I said, my voice barely steady. Hey, he replied. His smile was warm but guarded. For a moment, we just stood there. The world moved around us, but it felt like time slowed down again. About last night, he started, then stopped, his hands clenched into fists in his pockets. I wanted to reach out, to tell him everything I felt, but the words caught in my throat. Me too, I finally said, about last night. He nodded, a slow, thoughtful movement. That kiss, it wasn't just a dare. We talked for hours that evening, not just about the game or the kiss, but about everything we'd never said, about the loneliness we'd both felt, about the moments when we wished things were different, about the secrets we kept hidden, even from ourselves. With every word, the walls between us crumbled a little more. The space between stepbrothers was filled with something new, something fragile and terrifying. Back at home, the storm had returned. The rain beat against the windows like a drum. Inside, the house felt cold, even with the heater on. That night, I lay awake again. This time, I wasn't pretending to sleep. I wasn't running from the truth. I was waiting for him. And when his hand found mine in the dark, I didn't pull away. The rain had been falling since afternoon. Not the violent, thunderous kind that rattles the windows, but the soft, steady drizzle that seeps into everything. The ground, the air, your bones. By the time evening settled, the whole world felt damp muted, like even sound had been swallowed by the gray. Inside, the house was warm, but not comforting. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen felt too loud. The ticking clock in the hallway felt too slow. And every so often, there was the sound of movement from his room down the hall. Mason. Since that night, we'd been careful. Too careful. It was like walking on a frozen lake. Every step had to be measured, precise, or else we crashed straight through the surface into icy water we couldn't escape from. And yet, under that carefulness, something was still alive. Something warm. Something I couldn't stop thinking about. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, hoodie sleeves pulled over my hands, staring out the window at the misty street lamps. Each one glowed like a halo in the rain. I told myself I was just thinking, but I was really listening. For footsteps, for his voice, for any excuse that would bring him to my doorway. And then it happened. A knock. Soft, like even he wasn't sure he should be there. I turned my head slowly, heart already starting to trip over itself. Yeah. My voice was quiet. The door opened just enough for his face to appear. His hair was messy, that careless kind of messy that made it look like he'd been running his hands through it over and over. He had on a faded t-shirt and those gray sweatpants I'd seen him wear 100 times. And yet, somehow, tonight they felt different. You want to go for a drive? He asked. I frowned. Now. It's raining. He leaned on the doorframe, smirking just a little. Exactly. No one's out. It's quiet. Then his voice dipped lower. Just us. 5 minutes later, we were in his car, the rain drumming on the roof like it was keeping a secret for us. The streets were empty, the stoplights glowing red against the slick pavement. Everything outside the windows was blurred, like the world didn't want to intrude. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely on his thigh. I kept sneaking glances at him, and every time I caught the faintest ghost of a smile on his lips. "What?" I finally asked. "Nothing," he said, but the corner of his mouth twitched. Then, softer, "I'd just like it when you come with me." The heat that shot through my chest was ridiculous. We were just driving. But it didn't feel like just driving. We ended up at the old overlook, the one above the river where the whole town looked like a scatter of lights tossed across black velvet. We didn't get out. We just sat there, the windshield wipers making that steady thump. Thump as they swept the glass. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he sighed and leaned back, turning his head to look at me. "Are we okay?" The question landed like a stone in my stomach. I met his eyes, and for a second, I thought about lying, about pretending everything was the same. But the truth was, I didn't want same anymore. "Yeah," I said slowly. "We're okay. Just different." He studied me, his jaw tightening like he was holding something back. Then, almost in a whisper, "I don't want different to mean apart." My throat tightened. "It doesn't." The drive back was quieter, but not awkward. It was a kind of quiet where you can feel every unspoken word hanging in the air, waiting for the right moment to be said. When we got home, the rain had slowed to a mist. Inside, the house was dark except for the lamp in the living room. I started toward my room, but he caught my wrist, gentle, like he wasn't sure I'd let him. I turned, and there it was again, that look, the one from that night. The one that said, "I want this. But I'm scared too." And before I could say anything, he let go. "Good night, Noah," he said softly. I stood there, watching him walk away, feeling the echo of his hand on my skin long after he'd gone. But later, lying in bed, the sound of rain still in my ears, I felt it again, that slow, tentative wave of his hand, finding mine in the dark. And this time, I held on first. Morning came, but it didn't feel like morning. The rain from last night hadn't stopped. It just thinned into a pale, gray drizzle, the kind that clung to the air and turned everything a little heavier, a little slower. I woke up to the faint hum of the heater and the smell of coffee drifting in from the kitchen. For a moment, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of last night in my head. That drive, that look, that almost touch in the hallway. It was like my mind had frozen each frame and kept flipping through them over and over until I couldn't tell if it was memory or fantasy. When I finally dragged myself into the kitchen, Mason was already there. He was leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone, coffee mug in hand. The steam curled lazily into the air between us. His eyes flicked up when I walked in. "Morning," he said, casual like nothing had changed. "Morning," I echoed, my voice coming out quieter than I meant. There was a pause, not awkward exactly, but weighted, like both of us were thinking about the same thing and pretending we weren't. We spent most of the day in that unspoken limbo. He stayed in the living room, half watching some movie. I drifted between my room and the kitchen, finding excuses not to linger, but not to leave entirely either. Every now and then, I'd catch him looking at me. Not long enough to call it staring, but long enough that I felt it. By late afternoon, the rain had finally stopped. The clouds broke just enough for a pale ribbon of sunlight to slip through. And that's when he said it. "Want to go out tonight?" I turned from the window. "Out where?" He shrugged, sipping his coffee. "Doesn't matter. Just somewhere. Then after a beat, we could play pool, or maybe something else." The way he said something else made my stomach tighten. We ended up in the basement instead, a space that hadn't been touched in months, maybe years. It smelled faintly of dust and old paint. The overhead light flickered. When he switched it on, he was holding a box. Inside was the old truth or dare game we'd played when we were younger, before things shifted. I raised an eyebrow. Seriously? He grinned. Why not? Just us. Like old times. We sat cross-legged on the worn carpet, the box between us. It felt stupid at first, asking each other harmless truths, daring each other to do ridiculous little things. But as the minutes passed, the dares got closer, riskier. Your turn, he said, leaning forward. Truth or dare? I hesitated. Dare. The smirk on his face made my pulse jump. He didn't look away when he said it. Kiss me. It wasn't like last time. There was no nervous laughter, no quick pull away. This time it was deliberate. I leaned in slowly, every inch between us heavy with heat. When our lips finally met, it was soft, almost cautious, like testing the edge of something dangerous. But then he deepened it, and for a moment, the basement, the rain, the whole damn world disappeared. When we broke apart, his breathing was unsteady. So, that's your dare, he whispered. I swallowed, my heart slamming in my chest. What's next? The grin that spread across his face was dangerous. You'll find out. From that night on, we both knew the game had changed. The basement light hummed above us, casting everything in that soft, washed-out glow. The kind of light that makes the shadows stretch longer, the kind that hides nothing. I was still breathing hard, though I was trying not to show it. Mason wasn't even pretending. His chest rose and fell in slow, deliberate movements, like he was forcing himself to stay calm. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. The box for truth or dare sat between us, one card still lying face down on the carpet, forgotten. He was the first to break the silence. You didn't have to do it, you know. I looked at him, half confused. What do you mean? His eyes flicked to my lips, just for a second, before coming back to mine. You could have chosen truth instead. I smirked faintly, trying to mask the way my stomach was tightening. Maybe I wanted to dare. That made him laugh, but it wasn't a casual laugh. It was low and a little rough around the edges, like he'd been holding something back for too long. The air between us felt charged now, like we stepped onto a line neither of us was ready to admit existed. I tried to focus on the game, to push the moment back into something playful. But every time I moved a card or shifted my position, my knee would brush his, or my sleeve would catch on his arm. Each tiny contact felt like a spark. Truth or dare? I asked, trying to sound normal. He leaned back on his hands, considering. Dare. My mind raced. I could have picked something easy, but my mouth betrayed me. I dare you to tell me what you're thinking right now. His eyes narrowed just slightly. That's more of a truth. Yeah, but you picked dare. You have to do it. He studied me for a long moment, and then he said it. I'm thinking, his voice slow, deliberate, that if we keep doing this, I'm not going to want to stop. The words hit me like a physical thing. I didn't even know how to respond. So I didn't. I just sat there, feeling my heartbeat in my throat. Somewhere above us, the heater clicked on. The warm air drifted down the basement stairs, carrying the faint scent of detergent from the laundry. It was the most ordinary thing in the world, and yet, here in this little pocket of space, everything felt different. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. Your turn. I swallowed. Truth. He smiled, slow, like he already knew the question. Do you regret it? The kiss. I should have lied. I should have said something easy, something that kept the game harmless. But instead, no. His jaw flexed, just barely, and I knew we weren't going back. We didn't end the game that night. We just let it fade, replaced by something quieter. We talked, not about the kiss, not about us, just random things. Old memories. Movies we'd watched 100 times. But the undercurrent was there, tugging at both of us. When we finally went upstairs, it was past midnight. The house was still. I could hear the soft patter of rain starting again outside. He stopped at the hallway, right outside my bedroom door. For a moment, it felt like he was going to say something, the kind of thing that would make the rest of the night impossible to sleep through. But Instead, he just gave me this look. Not a smile. Not quite serious. Just that look. And then he turned away, disappearing into his room. I stood there for a long time, the darkness of my room spilling out behind me, wondering how long we could keep pretending this was just a game. The rain had been steady since before dawn. Not the loud, pounding kind, but the soft, endless kind, the one that seeps into your bones and your thoughts. I woke up to it. Or maybe I woke up because I'd been thinking about him all night. I couldn't tell anymore. When I walked into the kitchen, Mason was already there. Hoodie on, hands wrapped around a steaming mug. The way he leaned against the counter made it look like he'd been there a while. He didn't look at me right away. Just sipped his coffee, watching the raindrops trail down the window. Morning, I said. It sounded too casual for the way my chest was tightening. Morning. He finally glanced at me, and in that single glance, I felt the echo of last night. We didn't talk about it. We just moved around each other. I made toast. He poured cereal. Our shoulders brushed once, maybe twice, and every time my mind went back to the basement. That card game, that dare, that kiss. It should have been easier once the night was over. It wasn't. By noon, the rain hadn't let up. The backyard was a mess of puddles and slick grass. We both ended up in the living room, half watching some old action movie neither of us cared about. I was on the couch. He was on the floor, back resting against the cushions, so close that my foot was just inches from his arm. Every time he shifted, my attention followed. Every little movement was louder than the dialogue on the TV. At one point, he reached for the remote, and his hand brushed against my ankle. He froze. I froze. It was nothing an accident, but the way his eyes flicked up at me, holding mine for just a second too long, made it something. We didn't speak for a while after that. The movie kept playing. The rain kept falling. But the space between us felt different. Smaller. Later, when he got up to grab another drink, I found myself watching him. Not just looking, but watching. The way his hoodie hung loose over his shoulders. The way his hair felt a little messy from leaning back. I hated how easy it was to notice everything about him now. He came back, holding 2 bottles of water. Here. Thanks. When he sat back down, he didn't go back to the floor. He sat next to me. Not too close, but close enough. For a while, we just sat like that. Rain outside. Some chase scene on the TV. And my mind refusing to stay where it should. Then he spoke. You've been quiet all day. I shrugged. Just tired. He tilted his head, studying me like he didn't believe it. Or maybe you've been thinking. That made my heart skip. About what? He didn't answer. Instead, he looked back at the TV, but I could see the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. Hours passed like that, not quite silence, not quite conversation. By evening, the rain had turned heavier, drumming against the roof in steady rhythm. When the movie ended, he stretched, arms lifting over his head, hoodie riding up just enough to show a strip of skin. I told myself I didn't notice. Want to play again? He asked suddenly. I raised an eyebrow. Truth or dare? Maybe. He was grinning now. We ended up in the basement again. Same carpet. Same hum of the heater. Same feeling like the walls had moved in just slightly closer. The first few rounds were harmless. Truth. What's your worst habit? Dare. Sing the chorus of a random song. But then he leaned forward, pulling a card. His eyes locked on mine. Dare. I could feel my throat tighten before I even said it. I dare you to sit next to me, right here, for the next 3 rounds. No moving. He didn't hesitate. He crossed a small space and sat beside me, closer than earlier, so close that our knees touched. The game continued, but I barely heard the questions. Every second of contact felt louder than words. Once, I dared him to tell me something he'd never told anyone. He looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, I'm not as good at hiding things as I thought. I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. By the last round, neither of us was even pretending to care about the cards. It wasn't about the game anymore. It was about who would move first. Neither of us did. When we finally stood up, it was late. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. Upstairs, the house was dark, except for the kitchen light spilling across the hallway. He walked with me toward my room, stopped again at my door. That same look from last night, only heavier now. "Good night," he said. His voice was low, almost like he didn't trust it. "Night." But I didn't go in. I stood there, listening to his footsteps fade down the hall, wondering how many more nights we could keep pretending this was still a game. The rain had stopped sometime during the night. I knew, because I could hear the quiet. No patter on the roof, no faint trickle in the gutters, just silence. But that silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. I stayed in bed longer than usual. Part of me didn't want to go downstairs, because I knew he'd be there. And part of me didn't want to go downstairs, because I knew if I saw him, I'd remember every second from last night. The way he'd sat beside me in the basement. The way neither of us had moved. The way his voice had sounded when he said goodnight, like it meant something else. When I finally went down, Mason was sitting at the table, scrolling on his phone. He looked up the second I stepped into the kitchen. It was a quick glance, but I caught it. That flicker of something in his eyes before he masked it. "Hey," he said. "Hey." The kettle was still warm, so I poured tea instead of coffee. Anything to give my hand something to do. We didn't talk much. Just the sound of my spoon against the mug and his thumb sliding over the screen. But I could feel him watching me when I wasn't looking. Around noon, the sky turned gray again. Not rain yet, just that heavy, waiting kind of sky. Mason leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You doing anything today?" "Not really." "Want to go out?" I blinked at him. "In this weather?" He smirked. "Exactly. No one else will be out. We'll have the whole place to ourselves." We ended up driving to the old park on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a walking trail, a little pond, and a few benches that looked like they'd been there since the 80s. But he was right. We were the only ones there. The air was cool. The ground was damp under our sneakers. And with every step, I could feel the quiet stretching between us. Not awkward, just full. At one point, we stopped by the pond. The water was still. A few leaves floated near the edges. Mason shoved his hands into his hoodie pocket and said, "You've been different lately." I laughed softly. "You too." He glanced at me, and for a moment, it felt like we were standing right on the edge of something. Something neither of us had the courage to name. He kicked at a pebble, sending it skittering toward the water. You ever think about how fast things can change? Like, 1 second it's normal, and the next. I asked when he didn't finish. He shook his head. "Never mind." We walked a little more, ending up at the far bench near the trees. The wood was cold when I sat down. He sat beside me, close enough that our knees brushed. Neither of us moved away. The wind picked up, carrying that smell of wet leaves and earth. "I keep thinking about the other night," Mason said quietly. My breath caught. Oh, it was the only thing I could manage. I mean, it was just a game. But he trailed off again, eyes fixed on the ground. I wanted to say something, anything to fill that space, but the words stuck. Finally, he looked up. His eyes were clearer than I'd ever seen them. "I don't think it felt like just a game to you either." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "You're right," I admitted. He smiled just barely. Then his gaze flicked down to my mouth and back up again. For a second, I thought he might close the gap between us. My pulse jumped. My hands clenched on my knees. But then he leaned back instead, exhaling like he'd just decided something. We sat there for a while, listening to the wind in the trees. Every few minutes, I caught him glancing at me again, like he was checking to see if I was still there. When we finally headed back to the car, the clouds had thickened. By the time we pulled into the driveway, the first drops of rain had started falling again. That night, we didn't play any games. We didn't go down to the basement. But when I passed him in the hallway before bed, he stopped, looked at me, opened his mouth like he was going to say something, and then didn't. "Night," he said instead. I stood there long after he'd gone into his room, the rain tapping at the windows again, and I couldn't help wondering how much longer until one of us stopped pulling back. The storm had been going all afternoon. It wasn't the light, friendly kind of rain we'd had the day before. This was heavier, louder, the kind that made the house feel smaller, like the walls were holding in more than just the heat. I'd spent most of the day in my room, pretending to read. Every time I reached the end of a page, I realized I hadn't absorbed a single word, because my brain kept circling back to one thing, one moment, that second, on the bench at the park, when Mason had looked at my mouth. It had been quick, barely there, but I'd seen it. And once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. By dinner, I'd worked myself into this strange, restless energy. The rain made the windows rattle. The smell of whatever Mom had left in the slow cooker filled the kitchen, warm and heavy. Mason came in halfway through, hair damp like he'd just showered. He moved around me easily, like we'd been doing this dance for years, passing behind me at the counter, reaching over me for the salt, his arm brushing mine, not hard, but enough that I noticed. We ate mostly in silence, but the kind where every bite feels like a placeholder for something you're not saying. Halfway through, he looked up. "You okay?" I nodded too quickly. "Yeah. Why?" He shrugged. "You just seem, I don't know, somewhere else." I gave a half smile. "Maybe I am. After dinner." He suggested watching something. I said sure. We ended up in the basement, lights dim, rain still hammering above us. The old couch felt even softer than usual, like it was inviting you to sink into it and stay. At first, we sat with the usual space between us. But as the movie went on, that space just disappeared. I couldn't tell you when or how. 1 minute, our shoulders were apart. The next, they weren't. He leaned back, stretching his arm along the back of the couch, so close that if I leaned just a little, I'd be against him. My pulse was so loud, I almost missed a line of dialogue on the screen. About halfway through the movie, the lights flickered. Once, twice, and then everything went black. The TV, the lamp, the low on the fridge upstairs. Gone. Power's out, Mason said, his voice low in the dark. "I guess we're sitting here in the dark now." I replied, my own voice quieter than I meant it to be. I could hear the rain louder without the TV. Could feel the closeness between us without the distraction of the screen. "Kind of weird, isn't it?" he said. "What?" "How quiet it is, except for you breathing." That line hung there. Heavy, warm. I shifted slightly, turning toward him. I couldn't see his face completely. Just a faint outline from the dim light filtering through the high basement window. But I could feel his eyes on me. Like he wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking into me. "You ever think about," he started, then stopped. "What?" I whispered. He exhaled slowly, and in that moment, I felt his knee press against mine. Not by accident this time. "About how long we've been dancing around this," he finished. The words made my chest tighten. Because yes, I had thought about it. Every day it seemed like I swallowed hard. Yeah. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The rain filled the silence. The darkness wrapped around us. And then he leaned in. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow enough that I could feel every inch of the space between us disappearing and know, without a doubt, that he wasn't going to pull back this time. When his lips finally touched mine, it was tentative, like he was still giving me the chance to stop him. But I didn't stop him. If anything, I leaned closer. The kiss was soft, almost questioning, but it felt like an answer to a question we'd both been asking, without words for weeks. When he pulled back, just barely, his forehead rested against mine. "You're shaking," he murmured. "Maybe I am," I admitted. We stayed like that for what felt like forever. No rush. No need to explain. Just the sound of rain, and two people finally letting go of whatever had been holding them back. Eventually, the power came back with a sudden hum. The lights flickered on, the TV started up again, and the spell broke. Just a little. Mason leaned back, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Guess the movie's back," he said. as if we hadn't just crossed a line neither of us could uncross. I smiled back. Yeah, guess so. But the movie played without either of us really watching it, because every few minutes I could feel his hand brush against mine again, and every time I let it stay a little longer. The rain had stopped sometime in the night. I only knew because when I woke up, the air in the house felt different. Still cool, but not heavy. The constant background drum of water on the roof was gone, replaced by a stillness that made everything else sound sharper. The movie from last night was still paused on the screen, in the basement. The blanket was still on the couch. And my pulse was still doing that fast, nervous thing, just thinking about what had happened there. I'd kiss Mason. Or he'd kiss me. Or maybe it was both. Either way, it had happened. It was real. And now what? When I came into the kitchen, Mason was already there, leaning against the counter, eating cereal straight from a box. He looked up when I walked in, and something in his eyes made my stomach drop and lift at the same time. A knowing look, a little smile, like he wasn't going to pretend it hadn't happened. "Morning," he said. His voice was casual, but the way he watched me over the rim of the cereal box made it impossible for me to answer with the same kind of ease. "Morning," I said, my tone just a little too careful. He didn't mention the kiss. I didn't either, but it was there between us, like the invisible heat from a stove that had just been turned off. You couldn't see it, but you could feel it if you got too close. We were mid-breakfast when I heard it. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Mason froze for half a second. "That's your mom." I finished for him. We hadn't been expecting her back until late tonight. Something about a friend's cabin and a few extra days away from a noise. But now her noise was back. And if she came in here and saw whatever was currently on my face when I looked at Mason, she'd know something was different. I don't know why I panicked. It wasn't like we'd done anything in the kitchen, but my whole body went tense, like being around him had suddenly become dangerous in the daylight. The front door opened, and sure enough, her voice filled the house. "Boys, you here?" Mason shot me a look that said, "Play it cool." I tried. I really did. She came into the kitchen carrying 2 grocery bags. Mason took one from her like nothing had changed. And for a minute, it almost worked. She asked about the storm, complained about her phone dying halfway through her trip, made a comment about how pale I looked. But then, her gaze shifted between the two of us. Not suspicious exactly, just curious. "You two seem quiet," she said. "Just tired," Mason replied quickly, pouring her some coffee. I kept my face as neutral as I could, but my mind was still replaying that kiss from last night. And I couldn't help wondering, could she see it? Could she tell? After she went upstairs to unpack, Mason let out a low whistle. That was close. I frowned. Close to what? We didn't do anything. "Yeah, but you—" He stopped, smirking slightly. "You don't hide things as well as you think you do." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't, because the truth was, my whole body still felt like it was giving something away. The rest of the day passed in strange, stuttered moments. Every time Mason brushed past me, my skin buzzed. Every time I caught him looking at me, my chest tightened, and all the while, his mom was somewhere in the house, walking in and out of rooms, asking us questions, completely unaware of how close she was to walking in on something more. That night, I was in my room when I heard a soft knock. It was late, too late for casual conversation. I opened the door, and there he was. No smirk this time, just that look again. "Come to the basement," he whispered. I hesitated. His mom was asleep down the hall, but my feet moved anyway. The basement was dark again, just like last night. No movie this time. No storm. Just us. He sat on the couch, patting the space beside him. I sat. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. And then he leaned closer, his voice almost too quiet to hear. "Last night? I've been thinking about it all day." I swallowed hard. "Me too." He studied me for a second. "You're not freaking out, are you?" I shook my head. "No, just trying to figure out what it means." His hand found mine in the dark, slowly, deliberately, And just like that, the buzz came back, that same dangerous, magnetic pull from the night before. "We're going to have to be careful," he said. "Yeah," I whispered, but the way his thumb brushed my skin told me that careful wasn't what either of us really wanted right now. We didn't kiss that night. Not because we didn't want to, but because we both knew if we started, we might not hear someone coming down the stairs. And we weren't ready to be caught. Not yet. The thing was, we were getting closer to not caring if we were. The thing about trying to ignore something you want is that you start noticing it even more. It had only been 2 days since that kiss in the basement. 2 days of keeping our voices steady when his mom was around. 2 days of not letting our hands linger when we passed each other something at the table. 2 days of acting like we didn't want to be alone in the same room when that was all we wanted. By the third night, the pretending had worn me down. It wasn't just that I thought about it before I fell asleep. It was that I couldn't stop thinking about it once I closed my eyes. The feel of his mouth against mine. The way his hand had cupped the side of my neck like he was afraid I'd pull away. The quiet sound he'd made that I was sure I wasn't supposed to hear when I didn't. And now, here we were. His mom had gone to bed early after a long day. The house was quiet again. That dangerous kind of quiet that felt like an invitation. I was in my room, scrolling through my phone when I heard the softest knock. Same as last time. 2 taps. Pause. 1 more. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. Mason was leaning against the frame, one hand in the pocket of his hoodie, his eyes already on mine. "You busy?" he asked. It wasn't a casual question. I shook my head, stepping out into the hall. He didn't say where we were going this time. I just followed him, not to the basement, not to the kitchen. This time, he led me straight to his room. I froze for a second when he closed the door behind us. We'd been in each other's rooms 100 times before, but this was different. The air felt heavier. His breathing was quieter. The space between us was almost nothing. "Mason," I started, but he stepped forward before I could finish. One hand went to my jaw, tilted my face up, the other slid to my waist. "You've been thinking about it too," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. And then he kissed me, not like the first time, testing, hesitant. This was urgent, like we both decided at the same time that waiting was the bigger risk. I kissed him back, hard, my hands gripping the front of his hoodie, like I could pull him closer if I tried hard enough. The kiss deep and messy and warm and real. Every second made it harder to remember why we'd been pretending in the first place. At some point, I realized my back was against the wall. His hands were in my hair. Mine were at his sides, under the edge of his sweatshirt, finding warm skin. The kind of closeness you don't walk away from without something changing. And then, footsteps. We froze, not pulling apart completely, just enough to breathe without our lips touching. His eyes were wide, his chest rising and falling fast. The footsteps passed down the hallway. The sound of water running in the bathroom. His mom. We didn't move until the water stopped and the door closed again. And then we laughed. Quietly, breathless, like 2 people who'd just gotten away with something they weren't supposed to do. Mason leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. "Still want to be careful?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I kissed him again instead. We didn't go any further that night, partly because we knew how thin the walls were, but mostly because the wanting was almost sweeter than the having. Almost. By the time I slipped back to my room, my lips were sore. My chest felt light. And I knew, without question, that pretending was over. We weren't just playing anymore. The thing about keeping a secret is that it's never really yours. It lives between you and the other person. Every glance, every pause in conversation, every time your hands almost touch and you both pretend you didn't notice. For weeks now, Mason and I have been orbiting each other like there was gravity pulling us in. We'd gotten good at playing it cool when anyone else was around. Too good, maybe, because sometimes I'd catch myself wondering if he could actually hide what he felt better than I could. That Friday night was supposed to be normal. We'd been invited to a party by one of his friends from the soccer team. A loud, crowded, safe setting where nothing could happen between us. At least, that's what I thought. When we got there, the place was packed, music thumping, people laughing over drinks, the smell of popcorn, sweat, and something burned in the kitchen. We split off into different conversations, but my eyes kept finding him. Even across the room, I could see the way he smiled when he was pretending not to watch me. Half an hour in, someone suggested a game. Truth or dare. A circle formed in the living room, and Mason caught my eye from across it. There was something in his look that made my stomach twist. The dare started harmless. Dance on the coffee table. Text your crush. I'm outside without explanation. Drink from the blender without knowing what was in it. And then someone, I think her name was Kelly, turned to Mason. Truth or dare? Dare, he said without hesitation. She smirked. I dare you to kiss. The pause felt like a lifetime. Noah. The room went quiet in that exaggerated, teasing way parties always do. Everyone laughed, clapped, whistled. My ears burned. I glanced at Mason, expecting him to roll his eyes, maybe laugh it off. He didn't. He got up, walked toward me. Every step made my pulse louder in my ears. The dare was supposed to be a joke. A few seconds, a laugh, then over. It wasn't. When he reached me, Mason stopped just close enough for me to feel the heat coming off him. Still just a game, he murmured. So quiet I almost didn't hear. And then he kissed me. Not a peck. Not a quick brush to get it over with. But a kiss like we were back in his room with the door closed. Like we didn't care that 20 people were watching. The circle went wild, laughing, gasping, shouting. But all I could hear was my heartbeat. When he pulled back, there was no smile on his face. Just that look. The one that said this wasn't a dare for him. And that's when I knew we just crossed a line we could never uncross. The rest of the night blurred. People kept making jokes, nudging us, saying we sold it like we were acting. But the truth was, we'd just given away everything. When the party died down, Mason found me outside on the porch. The air was cold enough to see our breath. He leaned on the railing beside me. You mad? He asked. I shook my head. No, just that was a big risk. He turned toward me, his voice low. It was worth it. And then, softer. I'm tired of pretending you're just my friend. My chest felt tight. Do you know what people will say? I asked. Yeah, he said. And I don't care. Something in me cracked then. Because for all the nights we'd stayed quiet, careful, hidden, this was the first time he'd said it out loud. And I realized I didn't care either. We didn't kiss again that night. Partly because we didn't have to. We'd already said everything without saying it. When we left, we walked close enough for our arms to brush. Not hiding it anymore. Later, lying in bed, I thought about that first dare weeks ago. How small it had seemed. How dangerous it had felt. And how one stupid game had led to this. To him. To us. To something I knew I'd never give back. No matter the risk. Because some dares, you don't just take. You keep.